Solo Leveling, Chapter 123. The king's path opens. The city had stopped moving, but not because the fight was over, because everything, even time, seemed to hesitate. As soon Jinwoo stood amid the rubble, surrounded by shattered giants and rising shadows, the air changed. Not the wind, not the mana. Something deeper, something aware. Far above the battleground, inside the broken cathedral that stood like a throne room carved from nightmares, it stirred. It hadn't moved in centuries, hadn't needed to. But now it had felt something it hadn't felt in ages. Arrival. Jinwoo's breath slowed. Not from exhaustion, he wasn't tired, but because his instincts had sharpened. Like the world had just leaned in closer to whisper something only he could hear. Behind him, Baru crouched, his head tilting sideways as he sniffed the air like a hound who just caught the scent of something ancient. "My king, we are not alone." Jinwoo didn't answer right away. He stared toward the center of the ruins. The throne was no longer empty. No figure sat upon it. But something was there. A pressure, a consciousness, a gaze that didn't blink. It wasn't mana, it wasn't magic, it was presence. And it was locked directly on him. The remaining giants had stopped attacking. Those still alive stood still, trembling, not with fear of Jinwoo, but of whatever had begun to awaken at the heart of their city. They were no longer protectors, they were offerings, and Jinwoo? He felt it now. Not as a hunter, not as a warrior, but as a monarch. Something was calling him, not to fight, but to ascend. He stepped forward, slowly, as the wind around him died. Even the dust in the air seemed to hold still, frozen in place like time itself was watching. For him and only him. The cathedral doors groaned open ahead of him, not pushed by hands, but by command, as if they'd been waiting. His shadow army did not follow. Not Biru, not Igris, not Tusk. Jinwoo turned to them, his voice low. "Stay here." Biru twitched. "My king, if I don't come back, destroy everything." And with that, he walked into the lightless throne room alone. Inside it was colder. Pillars twisted with carvings of battles between gods and monsters. Runes etched in languages that no longer existed. Bloodstains that had long since dried, but never faded. Not in temperature, but in memory. The walls hummed with forgotten history. At the far end, the throne. Empty, waiting. But as Jinwoo stepped closer, the room reacted. The air pulsed once, and the carvings on the walls lit up in a deep violet hue. "You must decide." A deep voice echoed, not through the room, but through his mind. "You have reached the end of your path, Shadow Monarch." Jinwoo stopped, and now the throne glowed. A haunting, low pulse, like a heartbeat buried beneath layers of stone and time. And then the illusion shattered. Wearing robes blacker than night, but his face was Jinwoo's own. The room around him warped, and suddenly Jinwoo was no longer inside stone ruins. He was standing in a sea of shadows. An infinite plane where darkness moved like liquid, where memories danced like smoke. And before him stood a man, tall, broad, older, wiser, crueler. His eyes burned with the same power, only deeper, refined, ancient. This power was never meant for humans. The voice echoed without sound, but you took it, molded it, made it yours. The vision stepped forward. "Now take the final step. Become what you were always meant to be." Jinwoo didn't move. He stared at the reflection of himself and asked quietly, "What happens if I refuse?" The other Jinwoo smiled. "Then you die here, as prey, as dust." He raised a hand, and from the shadows, figures began to rise. Monarchs. Not giants, not beasts, but kings of old. One with flame cascading from his eyes, one with wings of bone and smoke, one with blades for arms and no face. They watched him in silence, not attacking, not speaking, waiting to see. if he'd survive. Or surrender. Then the real Jinwoo smiled. "I've never liked being told what I'm meant to be." He opened his palm. Black smoke began to spiral upward. His blade formed from nothing, from darkness shaped by will. And behind him, the shadows rose once more. Not soldiers, not followers, but loyalty made flesh. Baru, Igris, Tusk, the beast monarch's remains, the giant king's echo. All stood behind him, not because he summoned them, but because they chose to follow. The throne room collapsed. The vision fractured. And Jinwoo stood once more in the real cathedral, now crumbling as light poured through its shattered ceiling. "I'll decide what I become." He turned his back on the throne. And as he walked away, the shadows deepened behind him. Because the monarch hadn't chosen a crown, he'd chosen war. Final line, the monarchs are watching, and the next to challenge him won't have time to regret it. Chapter 124. The monarchs make their move. Solo leveling. Chapter 124. The gathering storm. The sky over Tokyo never returned to normal, even after the gate shattered. Even after the giants fell. Something remained behind, invisible to the eyes of ordinary men, but not to him. To Jinwoo, the world was trembling, not physically, but at the seams, as if the very rules of reality were beginning to stretch. To Tyr, and someone, or something was on the other side, pulling. Helicopters circled distant districts. Emergency broadcasts echoed across abandoned streets, but none of that mattered now. He stood on the rooftop, the wind brushing past his coat, the city far below still wrapped in fear. Not to him, because his mind wasn't in Japan anymore. It was somewhere far darker. A voice still lingered in his thoughts, not from the gate, not from a monster, but from a throne carved in silence. "You've reached the end of your path." But Jinwoo had refused the throne. He didn't want to inherit power. He wanted to earn it. And now, the ones who had been watching were preparing to act. Miles away, in a place unmarked by maps or satellites, a monarch stirred. Dark wings spread inside a cave lit only by pale green fire. A woman's form stood at the center, her body wrapped in living shadows, her eyes glowing like dying stars. She smiled. "He's awakened." Another figure appeared behind her, a being cloaked in armor that flickered like static, with blades coiling from its back like broken halos. "Then it's time," he said coldly. The monarchs had waited centuries. They had watched kingdoms rise and fall. But now, changed everything. The Shadow Monarch had chosen war over obedience. And that. Back in Tokyo, Jinwoo rejoined the others. The Hunters Association staff scrambled like ants, still trying to process what had happened. The death toll was low. But the fear? It was colossal. Goto's team, the elite of Japan, were gone, erased. Their pride shattered before a single giant. But Jinwoo had done alone what 20 top S ranks could not. The room went quiet when he entered, not out of awe, but because no one knew what to say. How do you speak to someone who walks among gods? Chairman Matsumoto stepped forward, trembling. His tone tried to sound firm, but his eyes betrayed him. "Hunter-sung, we owe you a great debt." Jinwoo didn't respond right away. He just looked at the man, not with anger, not with pride, but with the weariness of someone who already knew what came next. "You knew it wasn't just a gate. Silence. You knew. And you sent them anyway." Matsumoto's hands clenched. "We had no choice. You did." Jinwoo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Because truth, spoken calmly, always cuts the deepest. Later, alone, Jinwoo met with Go Gun-hee. The old man's face was pale. His body, weaker than before. But his mind? Still sharp. "Did you see it?" the chairman asked softly. "The monarchs?" Jinwoo replied. A nod. Then it started. Jinwoo sat across from him, arms folded, gaze steady. They're watching. And they're planning something. Then we don't have much time. Go-Gun-He's fingers trembled as he reached into his drawer. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk. This was sent from America. They want to meet with you. The Scavenger Guild? Yes, their Grand Marshal. Jinwoo didn't answer immediately. His thoughts drifted, not to power, not to money, but to the warning he'd felt deep inside the gate. They're not just planning, Chairman. They're gathering. Elsewhere, far beyond the reach of satellites and borders, a vast frozen wasteland lay under eternal moonlight, and within it, a throne of ice. Upon it sat a man with glowing blue eyes and hair like falling snow. His breath froze mid-air. His fingers tapped the armrest slowly. The Shadow Monarch is resisting. Dragons curled around glaciers. Wolves with iron bones howled in the distance. He smiled barely. Good. Behind him, beasts stirred. This wasn't just a battlefield. It was a kingdom waiting for war. And he was its king. Jinwoo returned home that night to silence. His mother was asleep. Gina's light still glowed under her door. But he didn't enter. He just stood there, hand on the doorknob, listening to the sound of her typing away, unaware of the way her brother now carried. He turned away before the tears could reach his eyes. In his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and opened his system screen. The messages hadn't stopped. Your shadow army has grown. You've acquired the soul of a monarch. Warning, monarchs are aware of your existence. Then, one new line. The king's path has opened. Jinwoo stared at it, not blinking, not moving, just breathing, because he understood now. This wasn't about dungeons. This wasn't about saving cities. This was about power, old, divine, violent. And the fight for that power was about to tear the world apart. Final whisper, the monarchs are rising. And in the next chapter, they stop watching and start hunting. Chapter 125. The first move belongs to them.